The Gestapo, Nazi Germany's engine of fear. When Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, his new Nazi regime needed more than fiery speeches and propaganda to cement its rule. It needed fear. And to enforce that fear, it created one of the most ruthless secret police organizations in modern history, the Gestapo. Short for Geheime Staatspolizei, the secret state police, the Gestapo was founded by Hermann Göring and later absorbed by Heinrich Himmler into the SS, the core of the Nazi terror system. At first, the Gestapo appeared to be a legitimate police force, charged with protecting national security. But behind that disguise was a machine of repression and brutality. Its sole mission, to detect and destroy all enemies of the state. These enemies included communists, trade unionists, intellectuals, religious figures, Jews, and anyone who dared to criticize Adolf Hitler. The Gestapo did not need evidence or court orders. Its power was absolute. Its word was law. The Gestapo's greatest weapon was not its numbers, but its ability to make every citizen fear their neighbor. By the late 1930s, the agency had only around 16,000 officers, yet it managed to control an entire nation of over 70 million people. Ordinary Germans were encouraged to denounce friends, co-workers, and even family members suspected of anti-Nazi behavior. A simple accusation could lead to arrest, torture, and disappearance. Once in Gestapo custody, victims faced brutal interrogations, sleep deprivation, and savage beatings. Many were sent to concentration camps or executed outright. As Himmler put it, the Gestapo does not act by law, but by conviction. One of the most famous examples of Gestapo ruthlessness was the destruction of the White Rose movement, a student-led resistance group in Munich. In 1942, university students Hans and Sophie Scholl, along with their friends, began distributing leaflets calling for an end to Nazi tyranny and the persecution of Jews. Their words spread like wildfire, inspiring hope in a country drowning in fear. But in February 1943, the Gestapo caught them in the act. They were interrogated for days, tortured, and then sentenced to death. On February 22, 1943, Hans and Sophie Scholl were guillotined, their bravery silenced, their legacy immortalized. The Gestapo's swift and merciless response sent a chilling message. Even words could be treason. In 1941, Hitler signed the Night and Fog Decree, giving the Gestapo unrestricted power over occupied territories. Anyone suspected of resistance could be arrested without a trace, vanishing into what Germans called Nacht und Nebel, the night and the fog. Families never learned what happened to their loved ones. Prisoners were secretly transported to concentration camps, executed, or worked to death. Through such measures, the Gestapo didn't just kill people, it erased them from history. In 1944, a group of high-ranking German officers, including Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, attempted to assassinate Hitler and overthrow the Nazi regime. The bomb failed to kill the Führer, and the Gestapo's retribution was swift and merciless. Over 7,000 people were arrested. Nearly 5,000 were executed, many hanged with piano wire, their deaths filmed for Hitler's personal viewing. When the Third Reich collapsed in 1945, the Gestapo was officially disbanded. Its leaders were tried at Nuremberg, where the world first heard the full extent of their crimes: torture chambers, forced disappearances, and collaboration in the Holocaust. The NKVD, Stalin's reign of terror. When Joseph Stalin rose to absolute power in the Soviet Union, he ruled through paranoia, fear, and control. But to maintain that power, he needed an instrument, an organization capable of crushing all opposition and enforcing blind loyalty. That instrument was the NKVD, the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs. Created in 1934, the NKVD was officially tasked with protecting the state. In reality, it became Stalin's personal weapon of terror, responsible for millions of arrests, deportations, and executions during one of the darkest eras in human history. The NKVD combined intelligence, policing, and paramilitary control under a single authority. It watched over every corner of Soviet life: factories, schools, farms, and even the Communist Party itself. Its agents spied on citizens, opened mail, tapped phones, and extracted confessions through brutal interrogations. A careless joke, a whisper of dissent, or even failure to applaud Stalin's speeches could lead to arrest. By night, black cars known as Chornye Voroni, black ravens, prowled the streets. When they stopped in front of a building, people held their breath, praying the knock wouldn't come to their door. Those taken were often never seen again. Between 1936 and 1938, the NKVD unleashed a wave of terror known as the Great Purge, a systematic cleansing of perceived enemies of the people. Under Stalin's direct orders and the command of Nikolai Yezhov, the NKVD arrested millions of communist officials, military officers, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens. Interrogations relied on torture, beatings, electric shocks, and sleep deprivation, until the accused confessed to fabricated crimes like espionage or sabotage. Once a confession was obtained, execution followed swiftly. In 2 years alone, an estimated 700,000 people were shot, and millions more were sent to the Gulag, vast labor camps in Siberia and Central Asia, where cold, hunger, and exhaustion killed countless prisoners. Even the NKVD's own officers were not safe. Many became victims of the same terror they enforced. During World War II, as the Soviet Union invaded Poland, the NKVD carried out one of its most infamous atrocities, the Katyn massacre. In April and May 1940, acting on Stalin's orders, NKVD execution squads systematically murdered more than 22,000 Polish officers, intellectuals, and prisoners of war. They were shot in the back of the head and buried in mass graves in the Katyn forest. For decades, the Soviet Union denied responsibility, blaming Nazi Germany. It wasn't until 1990 that Moscow officially admitted the truth, that the NKVD had indeed carried out the massacre. Katyn became a symbol of Soviet brutality and deception, haunting relations between Russia and Poland for generations. The Gulag, a sprawling network of forced labor camps, was administered by the NKVD. By the late 1930s, over 2 million prisoners were held across thousands of camps. Many were political prisoners, intellectuals, and even loyal communists accused of imaginary crimes. They worked in deadly conditions, building railways, digging canals, and logging timber in sub-zero temperatures. Starvation, disease, and exhaustion killed millions. The Gulag became both a tool of punishment and a pillar of the Soviet economy, built on human suffering. After World War II, the NKVD's power began to wane. In 1946, it was reorganized and renamed the MGB, the Ministry of State Security, and later, in 1954, evolved into the KGB, which would continue the legacy of surveillance and repression under new leadership. But the shadow of the NKVD remained, a reminder of how a state consumed by fear can turn against its own people. The Stasi, Watchers of East Germany. When World War II ended and Germany was divided, the Soviet-controlled East German state, the German Democratic Republic, or GDR, was born out of fear and suspicion. To keep that new state under control, the communist leadership needed a force to crush dissent and ensure absolute obedience. That force was the Stasi, short for Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, or Ministry for State Security. Formed in 1950, the Stasi quickly became one of the most invasive and efficient intelligence agencies in history, a machine built to watch, control, and manipulate every aspect of its citizens' lives. Under the leadership of Erich Mielke, the Stasi developed a surveillance system so extensive that it seemed to read the minds of East Germans. By the 1980s, the Stasi employed over 90,000 full-time agents and had nearly 200,000 informants, one for every 60 citizens. Teachers, students, priests, and even spouses informed on each other. Homes were bugged, letters steamed open, and phones tapped. No one knew who to trust. The Stasi didn't just collect information. It destroyed lives quietly. Instead of open violence, they perfected psychological warfare, a method called Zersetzung, decomposition. Through Zersetzung, the Stasi would ruin a person's life from the inside out, sabotaging careers, spreading rumors, tampering with relationships, and isolating their targets until they broke down mentally. It was oppression masked as everyday life. When the Berlin Wall was erected in 1961, dividing East and West Germany, the Stasi took on a new mission: to ensure no one escaped the socialist paradise. They monitored border guards, watched over entire neighborhoods near the wall, and created files on anyone suspected of planning to flee. Those caught trying to cross, or even helping someone to, faced brutal interrogation and imprisonment. Yet, despite the constant surveillance, over 5,000 East Germans managed to escape during the wall's 28-year existence. Each successful defection was a humiliation the Stasi never forgot, and often they retaliated by persecuting the families left behind. The Stasi understood that control wasn't only about policing the streets. It was about controlling thought. Religious institutions and artistic communities were viewed as breeding grounds for dissent. Informants infiltrated church leaders. Underground writers and musicians were blacklisted or jailed. In one infamous case, the Stasi embedded informants inside the Protestant church movement, which had become a subtle voice of opposition in the 1980s. Even pastors and youth group leaders reported to handlers in secret meetings. By the end of the GDR, the Stasi had compiled files on over 6 million East Germans, recording even the smallest acts of disobedience. As the Cold War began to crumble in the late 1980s, so did the Stasi's empire. When the Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989, protesters stormed Stasi headquarters in East Berlin, determined to stop the destruction of files that documented 40 years of oppression. Inside, they found mountains of shredded paper, listening devices, and photographs. Evidence of a surveillance state unlike any the world had ever seen. It took years for archivists to reconstruct the files, many of which revealed betrayals that tore apart families and friendships. After the reunification of Germany, the Stasi was officially dissolved in 1990. But its legacy endures, as a warning of how surveillance and fear can transform a nation into a prison without walls. The Securitate, Ceausescu's iron grip on Romania. When Nicolae Ceausescu rose to power in 1965, he presented himself as a nationalist, a leader who would free Romania from Moscow's shadow. But behind his speeches of independence and progress, he built one of the most oppressive secret police systems in Eastern Europe, the Securitate. Formed in 1948, modeled after the Soviet NKVD, and officially known as the Departamentul Securității Statului, or Department of State Security, the Securitate became Ceausescu's all-seeing eye. Its mission was to defend the people's democracy. In truth, it defended only Ceausescu's rule. At its peak, the Securitate had over 11,000 agents and nearly 500,000 informants, in a country of only 22 million people. Almost every apartment block, school, church, and factory had at least one Securitate informer. People feared even speaking in their own homes. Typewriters were registered, photocopiers monitored, and foreign broadcasts jammed. Securitate agents bugged phones, intercepted mail, and infiltrated every aspect of daily life. A careless word could lead to interrogation or disappearance. Those accused of anti-state activity were arrested and subjected to brutal torture in prisons such as Aiud and Jalava, where electric shocks, beatings, and psychological torment were routine. Families of suspects were blacklisted, their children barred from universities or jobs. Under Ceausescu, paranoia became policy. He transformed himself into a godlike figure. His portrait hung in every home, his speeches broadcast daily. To maintain this illusion of perfection, the Securitate silenced anyone who questioned the regime. Journalists who spoke of poverty or repression vanished. Workers who complained about food shortages were arrested. Even jokes about Ceausescu were treated as crimes against the state. In the 1980s, as the Romanian economy collapsed and hunger spread, the Securitate intensified its control, rationing not only food and electricity, but also information. Romania became a prison within its own borders. By December 1989, decades of fear boiled over into revolution. Protests erupted in Timișoara, spreading rapidly across the country. As Ceausescu's grip slipped, Securitate agents opened fire on unarmed civilians, killing over 1,100 people in the uprising. But the tide could not be stopped. On December 25, 1989, Ceausescu and his wife were captured, tried, and executed by firing squad. The Securitate collapsed with them, its agents hunted, its files exposed. The documents revealed a shocking truth. The Securitate had dossiers on more than a third of the adult population. Friends, lovers, priests, and even children had been turned into informants. Savak, the Shah's eyes and ears. In the aftermath of World War II, Iran stood at a crossroads, caught between Western influence and internal unrest. When Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi returned to power in 1953, following a CIA and MI6-backed coup, he vowed never to lose control again. To protect his throne and crush opposition, he created an instrument of fear, Savak, the Sazeman-e Etelaat va Amniat-e Keshvar, or the Organization of Intelligence and National Security. Established in 1957, with direct help from American and Israeli advisors, Savak quickly grew into one of the most ruthless and efficient secret police forces in the Middle East. Savak's mission was simple: to detect and destroy any threat to the Shah's regime, whether real or imagined. Its reach extended into every aspect of Iranian society: universities, mosques, factories, newspapers, and even family homes. Agents recruited neighbors, co-workers, and relatives as informants. A whisper, a political joke, or a book deemed subversive could bring a midnight knock at the door. At its height, Savak had an estimated 60,000 operatives and informants, and its mere mention was enough to silence a room. It became a symbol of total control, a state where citizens feared even their own thoughts. Savak specialized in both surveillance and suppression. It monitored phone calls, censored newspapers, and tracked political exiles abroad. But its darkest reputation came from its interrogation centers, especially the infamous Evin prison in Tehran. Inside Evin's walls, prisoners faced electric shocks, beatings, sleep deprivation, and mock executions. Some were kept in solitary confinement for months, emerging broken, physically and mentally. Savak didn't just punish dissent, it erased it, leaving behind a trail of fear that seeped into every layer of society. Even religious clerics who criticized the Shah's westernization policies were targeted. Among them was a rising figure who would one day lead a revolution, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In 1963, when Khomeini publicly condemned the Shah's regime and his alliance with the West, Savak struck swiftly. He was arrested and later exiled to Iraq and France. But his words had already spread, smuggled through cassette tapes and underground networks that Savak tried but failed to completely suppress. Over the following decade, Savak intensified its surveillance, imprisoning thousands of political activists, students, and journalists. Yet the harder it struck, the more resentment it fueled. The people's hatred for Savak became hatred for the Shah himself. By the late 1970s, Iran was a nation on edge, prosperous on the surface, but rotting beneath from fear and repression. When the Iranian Revolution erupted in 1979, the streets of Tehran filled with chants against tyranny and secret police rule. Savak headquarters were stormed, agents fled or were lynched, and its prisons were thrown open to reveal the horrors inside. In the chaos, Savak's files were seized, exposing the depth of its surveillance network. Tens of thousands of dossiers on citizens, journalists, and dissidents. The organization was officially dissolved in February 1979, just days after the Shah fled the country. Many of its top officials were executed by the new regime, while others vanished into exile. Savak was replaced by a new security apparatus, the Islamic Republic's own intelligence network, including the Ministry of Intelligence, MOIS, and the Revolutionary Guard's intelligence branch. Ironically, many of the methods once used by Savak, surveillance, infiltration, and coercion, continued under a new banner. Historians estimate that during its two-decade reign, Savak imprisoned tens of thousands of Iranians and executed or tortured thousands more. For many Iranians, it remains a symbol of the Shah's arrogance and the West's complicity in sustaining a police state.
Pinochet's shadow police. When General Augusto Pinochet seized power in Chile on September 11, 1973, overthrowing the democratically elected president Salvador Allende, he vowed to save the country from communism. But what followed was not salvation. It was a reign of terror, enforced by his secret police, the DINA, Dirección de Inteligencia Nacional. Founded in 1974, DINA became the backbone of Pinochet's dictatorship, controlling everything from censorship and surveillance to torture and assassination. Its creation marked the birth of a new kind of state terror in Latin America, one backed by foreign intelligence and coordinated across borders. Under the command of Colonel Manuel Contreras, DINA operated entirely outside the law. Its agents arrested thousands of Chileans accused of being leftists, unionists, or supporters of Allende's Socialist Party. Many were taken to secret detention centers like Villa Grimaldi, Londres 38, and Tres Alamos, places that became synonymous with torture and disappearance. Inside these facilities, prisoners were subjected to electric shocks, beatings, and sexual assault. Families were never told what happened to their loved ones. Some bodies were thrown into the sea, others buried in unmarked graves. Between 1973 and 1977, DINA was responsible for the disappearance or death of over 3,000 people, and the imprisonment and torture of more than 30,000. DINA didn't operate alone. In the mid-1970s, Chile joined other South American dictatorships, Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil, and Uruguay, in a covert alliance known as Operation Condor. This network coordinated intelligence sharing, abductions, and assassinations of exiled dissidents across continents. It was state terror on an international scale. Under Condor, DINA agents tracked and murdered opponents even outside Chile. One of the most notorious cases was the 1976 assassination of Orlando Letelier, Chile's former ambassador to the U.S., killed by a car bomb in Washington, D.C., the work of DINA operatives under Contreras' orders. The blast shocked the world, proving that Pinochet's reach extended far beyond Chile's borders. By 1977, international pressure, particularly from the United States, forced Pinochet to disband DINA. But it was quickly replaced by a new agency, the CNI, Central Nacional de Informaciones, which continued many of the same brutal practices under a different name. In the years that followed, human rights organizations uncovered DINA's extensive network of detention centers, torture facilities, and secret graves.
Manuel Contreras was later arrested and sentenced to over 500 years in prison for his crimes, though he remained defiant until he died in 2015. Dina left deep scars on Chile's national psyche. It transformed an open democracy into a police state, where fear and silence ruled for nearly 2 decades. Its victims, known as Los Desaparecidos, the disappeared, remain a haunting reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. Even today, thousands of Chilean families still search for the remains of those taken by Dina's agents.
The Khmer Rouge's Santabal. In April 1975, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, seized control of Cambodia. To the outside world, they promised a new beginning, a society free of class, capitalism, and corruption. But beneath that vision lay a nightmare of total control and mass extermination. To enforce their rule, the Khmer Rouge created the Santabal, their version of a secret police. Its purpose was simple: to identify and eliminate enemies of the revolution. In practice, it became the beating heart of one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. At the center of the Santabal's operations stood S-21, a former high school in Phnom Penh converted into a torture and execution facility. Its commandant, Kang Kek Yew, known to his victims as Comrade Dooch, transformed classrooms into cells and blackboards into instruments of terror. Inside S-21, the regime's paranoia took physical form. Teachers, doctors, monks, and even loyal Khmer Rouge cadres were accused of treason and were brought there to confess. No one was safe, not even those who once served the revolution. The system was chillingly methodical. Victims were photographed upon arrival, forced to write detailed autobiographies, and interrogated for days, until they confessed to imaginary crimes like spying for the CIA or KGB. Once a confession was signed, prisoners were taken to the Choing Ek killing fields, where they were executed, often with blunt weapons to save bullets. Their bodies were buried in mass graves. Out of the over 14,000 people who entered S-21, only 12 survived. The Santabal's power reached far beyond Tuol Sleng. Its agents monitored every village, every commune, rooting out supposed enemies of the state, intellectuals, minorities, or anyone who wore glasses, spoke a foreign language, or questioned the regime's orders. By the time the Khmer Rouge fell, nearly 2 million Cambodians, a quarter of the population, were dead from execution, starvation, or forced labor. The Santabal's meticulous record-keeping revealed a terrifying truth. Genocide had been turned into an administrative procedure. Murder reduced to paperwork. In 1979, the Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia, toppling Pol Pot's regime. When investigators entered S-21, they found the building frozen in time. Shackles on the floors, bloodstains on the walls, and the haunting faces of thousands of victims preserved in photographs. The world finally came to understand the full extent of the horror. In later years, Dooch and other surviving Khmer Rouge leaders were tried by international tribunals. Dooch himself confessed to his role, expressing remorse before being sentenced to life imprisonment. But for most Cambodians, justice came too late. Entire families, entire generations, had already vanished into the silence of the killing fields. Today, Tuol Sleng stands as a museum, a chilling reminder of what happens when ideology becomes absolute and fear becomes law. The Santabal was not just a secret police force. It was a machine of extermination, built to erase identity, humanity, and history itself.
Iraq's Mukhabarat under Saddam Hussein. In the heart of the Middle East, Saddam Hussein built not just a state, but a fortress of fear. At the center of that fortress stood the Mukhabarat, Iraq's intelligence service, one of the most feared and secretive organizations in the region. Officially known as the Iraqi Intelligence Service, IIS, it was established in the 1970s with the guidance of the Soviet Union. Its mission was supposedly to defend Iraq from foreign threats, but in truth, its primary purpose was far more sinister: to protect Saddam from Iraqis themselves. From the moment Saddam seized power in 1979, the Mukhabarat became his most trusted weapon. It infiltrated every part of Iraqi society: schools, mosques, universities, even families. Teachers spied on students, neighbors spied on neighbors, and family members feared one another. The agency had eyes everywhere. Letters were opened, phone calls tapped, and anyone who dared to criticize the regime could vanish overnight. Within days, their families would receive a simple message: do not ask questions. The Mukhabarat operated a network of secret prisons scattered across Iraq, from the basements of government buildings in Baghdad to hidden compounds in the desert. Inside, torture was routine. Electric shocks, acid burns, and brutal beatings were used to extract confessions or break spirits. Some victims were forced to watch as their loved ones were tortured before them, a tactic designed to ensure lifelong obedience. Defectors described the cells as places where the air itself seemed to scream. Those who entered rarely came out alive. The Mukhabarat did more than just terrify Iraqis. It hunted enemies abroad. Agents operated across Europe and the Middle East, tracking down exiled dissidents, Kurdish leaders, and former Baathists who had fallen out of favor. Assassinations were carried out in London, Beirut, and Amman. One of the most infamous cases was the 1980 killing of Ayatollah Mohammad Baqir al-Sadr, a prominent Shia cleric who opposed Saddam's rule. He was tortured and executed, along with his sister, in an effort to silence Iraq's Shia opposition forever. Even Saddam's closest allies were not safe. High-ranking officers and ministers could be executed at a moment's notice, their families erased from public records, their names never spoken again. At its peak, the Mukhabarat controlled tens of thousands of operatives, both official and covert. It maintained its own military units, ran propaganda campaigns, and oversaw mass deportations of ethnic Kurds and Shiites suspected of disloyalty. It played a central role in the Anfal campaign of the late 1980s, where entire Kurdish villages were destroyed and thousands were executed or gassed. To Iraqis, the Mukhabarat wasn't just an intelligence agency, it was the face of tyranny itself. When US-led forces invaded Iraq in 2003, they dismantled Saddam's regime, and with it, the Mukhabarat. Its headquarters were stormed, revealing vast archives of surveillance reports, interrogation logs, and lists of informants. Torture chambers were uncovered, the instruments of fear now silent. Today, the word Mukhabarat still carries a chill in Iraq. It represents the years when speaking a wrong word could mean death, when silence was the only safety. For decades, Saddam Hussein ruled not through consent, but through fear, industrialized and weaponized by his secret police.
Argentina's military junta, the Dirty War. Between 1976 and 1983, Argentina lived through one of the darkest chapters in its modern history, a period the world would come to know as La Guerra Sucia, the Dirty War. Behind the language of national security and anti-subversion, the military junta waged a campaign of terror against its own people, one that sought to erase not just political opponents, but the very idea of dissent. On March 24, 1976, Argentina's armed forces overthrew President Isabel Perón, claiming they were saving the nation from left-wing terrorism and social chaos. In her place, they installed a military dictatorship led by General Jorge Rafael Videla, a regime that promised order but delivered silence, fear, and death. Almost overnight, Argentina became a state of suspicion. Students, journalists, priests, and union leaders were branded as subversives. To question the government, to speak of justice, or even to know the wrong person could be a death sentence. To enforce its will, the junta built an invisible system of terror, a network of secret detention centers hidden inside schools, police stations, and military compounds. Among the most infamous was ESMA, the Naval Mechanics School in Buenos Aires. Inside its walls, thousands were held in cramped, windowless cells. Many were blindfolded and kept in silence for months. Torture was systematic. Beatings, electrocution, waterboarding, and psychological torment. Prisoners were forced to name accomplices, anyone the regime could label a threat. And when they were no longer helpful, they were made to disappear. The word desaparecido, disappeared, came to define an entire generation. People were abducted off the streets, from workplaces, from their homes in the dead of night. Families received no body, no trial, no explanation. Victims were drugged and thrown alive from airplanes into the Rio de la Plata or the Atlantic Ocean, a practice chillingly known as death flights. In some cases, even pregnant detainees were kept alive only long enough to give birth. Their babies were taken from them, handed over to military families or supporters of the regime, while the mothers were executed soon after. By the time democracy returned, an estimated 30,000 people had vanished. Under the junta, Argentina became a country where silence was survival. The media was censored, books were banned, universities were purged. Even the Catholic Church, in many cases, remained quiet or complicit. But not everyone stayed silent. A small group of women, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, began gathering every Thursday in Buenos Aires, demanding to know what happened to their children. Their white headscarves and photographs of the missing became symbols of defiance against a regime built on lies. By 1982, Argentina's dictatorship began to crumble. The disastrous Falklands War against Britain exposed its weakness and led to the junta's collapse. When democracy was restored the following year, the new government faced a monumental task: confronting the crimes of the past. In 1985, Argentina became the first Latin American country to put its former military rulers on trial for human rights abuses. The trial of the juntas exposed the horror in detail. Testimony from survivors, documents, and confessions that shocked the world. ESMA, once a place of unspeakable suffering, was later transformed into a museum of memory, a monument to the victims, and a warning to future generations. The dirty war left deep scars, but it also left a powerful message: that memory itself is resistance, and truth is the only weapon against tyranny.